For the last week, the world has been watching Nairobi. Here's what they saw.
Young Kenyans are demonstrating for their rights. They're demonstrating with flags and banners. I can't even see anymore. They're being tear gassed. They're being
That woman struggling to speak because her lungs and throat are on fire. Her name is Alma Obama. She's a Kenyan activist, and yes, Barack Obama's half-sister. Protesters and police have been at each other's throats, and there has been incredible violence.
I've counted at least 3 bodies around the parliament.
Humanitarian groups say police fired live rounds. They also say more than a dozen people, at least, were killed, many more hurt. The military was deployed, and protesters were furious.
Police opening fire on demonstrators trying to storm Parliament.
I'm here to address you. You must go. Ruto must go.
This seething anger stemmed from a government attempt to raise taxes on lots of things, from cars to sanitary pads, smartphones, and staples like sugar, vegetable oil, bread. But this wasn't just about money. It wasn't even really about politics. It was about desperation, about a people who felt beaten down again and again. They told their government, told the world that they'd had enough, and today, the government listened.
I run a government, but I also lead people. And the people have spoken.
It might be strange for us as Canadians to think of the price of bread as something that's worth dying over. But bread just isn't worth the same here as it is there. Like a lot of food staples, bread is tax exempt in Kenya. But the government wanted to change that. It proposed a 16% tax on a loaf of bread. And the government wasn't just hiking taxes on bread. It wanted to introduce new taxes on things like vegetable oil, sugar, milk, diapers, batteries, cigarettes, alcohol, bank transfers, furniture, lottery tickets, smartphones, microphones, night vision cameras. Not quite everything, but to the average Kenyan, it probably felt like everything. The government even proposed an annual tax on motor vehicle ownership, up to 100,000 Kenyan shillings a year, which is about $1,000 Canadian just to drive. These measures together would have affected virtually everybody.
Almost all of them also risk increasing the cost of living for lower and middle income people at a time when those groups are struggling and when they feel like they're not getting enough from government in return for the taxes that they pay.
Already proposed introduction of tax of basic items like the sanitary pads, the bread, like the motor vehicle tax. Now, people felt that, this was too much.
If this had just been about taxes, Kenya might never have reached this boiling point. But it's really about fairness and who pays for Kenya's incredible growth. Kenya has one of the fastest growing economies in all of Africa. Look at their GDP. Starting around 2005, the value of Kenya's economy doubled in only a few years. It would double again in less than a decade. And at this rate, it'll probably take less than 10 years to double in size again. But not everyone benefits the same way in such a fast-moving economy. According to the World Bank, around 1 in 6 Kenyans live below the international poverty line. Millions of people, especially in rural Kenya, live on the equivalent of just a few dollars a day. Pandemic inflation has also hit Kenya the same way it's hit everywhere else. This is what it's looked like just in the last couple of years. Every month, the price of everything up 6, 7, 8% compared to the year before. And you know what Western economies did when the price of everything went up? Yeah, they jacked up interest rates. And that has a big impact on Kenyan debt.
Debt servicing costs have gone up. The government of Kenya is spending something like 35% of its annual budget on debt servicing costs before it even gets to then trying to provide services to citizens.
In this world, there are net borrowers and net lenders. Kenya is a net borrower. It draws billions of dollars from the International Monetary Fund. It just reached a deal this month to access an additional $1.1 billion. But all of those loans come with strings, either increasing interest payments or, in the IMF's case, a demand of Kenya's government to provide promises and plans to generate revenue. Otherwise, the taps turn off.
So against that background, they're sort of desperate to raise revenue, and they're desperate to raise revenue quickly.
So the government, desperate to keep its economic machine from sputtering out, turned to its people. But those people already felt squeezed. They resented being forced to give more when they already give so much. And when you layer on top other economic shocks, wars disrupting supply chains, droughts crippling the country's agriculture industry, what you're left with is a population that screams, enough is enough.
Kenyans, especially the employed Kenyans, started feeling the pinch of the government tax policies.
This is a reaction to a broader set of challenges that countries have faced over the past 5 years.
Protesters were livid, especially young protesters who felt the government was paying its bills with their futures. They called their demonstrations 7 days of rage.
We are rejecting this finance bill.
The president of Kenya has sent in the military after protesters set fire to the country's parliament building.
We are not asking for any amendment. We are asking for them to reject it.
They organized on social media.
Some analysts have been dubbing them as the Kenyan Arab Spring because they were tech-driven.
How did you find out about the protests? Online. Every information is online.
Commissioned translations of the government's proposed tax hikes so everybody everywhere could get informed. They created AI-driven resources that could answer questions about what the government was trying to do.
What we saw, something that has never happened in Kenya. The youth, the angry youth, overpowered the guards who are manning the parliament buildings, and they got entry.
They confronted officials in public, carried coffins to some lawmakers' offices, and demanded nothing short of the full withdrawal of the government's finance bill. But they paid a price. According to groups like Amnesty International and the Kenya Medical Association, clashes with police were deadly. The government of William Ruto deployed the military. Humanitarian groups accused security forces of arresting and effectively abducting prominent Kenyan critics, especially those with large social media followings. And it seemed like the president wouldn't back down.
That the government has mobilized all resources at the nation's disposal to ensure that a situation of this nature will not recur again at whatever cost.
It really is striking that in less than 24 hours, President Ruto went from accusing protesters of treason, calling them a threat to national security, and their actions a reign of terror.
I hereby put on notice the planners, financiers, orchestrators, and abettors of violence and anarchy that the security infrastructure established to protect our republic and its sovereignty will be deployed to secure the country and restore normalcy.
He would not allow vandalism and acts of criminal destruction that was seen. So it was a very stern national address by President Ruto.
Ruto went from that to this.
Having reflected on the continuing conversation around the content of the Finance Bill 2024, and listening keenly to the people of Kenya, I concede, and therefore I will not sign.
The president had no option. The pressure was too much.
Kenya's president says the bill, all of the proposed tax hikes, will be withdrawn, leaving the question, so how does Kenya pay its bills?
It's a very strong movement. If the issues are not adequately addressed, we are likely to see a resumption of this protest.
That is the difficult work ahead. Spending cuts are almost certainly in the works, starting Ruto says, with cuts to the budget of the presidency. The people have spoken.